This item, the first item on the left of the page of the Times today, Wednesday, the 3rd of February 2021, this actually fact related. It may not be true, but it is related to facts. Now, we shall see if it talks about any clinically checked evidence to substantiate the claim that the vaccine does reduce spread of coronavirus, because the mixed reports, not just in Fleet Street, but in other parts of the internet and the media, say that there is no certainty that the vaccine actually works. And this is doubly contradicted, this assertion that they're saying that the Oxford jab does reduce spread of coronavirus. This is challenged or contradicted by the admission in various parts of the media that say that despite the fact that people do get vaccinated, they should maintain the social distance and lockdown rules. So if it is effectively spreading protection from the spread of the virus, then why are they also insisting that people maintain the lockdown rules? So that is the contradiction. And the Times, despite not being a tabloid in the content sense, it is a tabloid in the printed sense, but not in terms of the contents or the kind of style of writing. It is not still producing the evidence. And there is a piece in the Times about, well, there is a 2-page spread about this South African virus, or the virus that is mutant strain moves to Bristol and Liverpool. Now, let's check if this one is the same one about the South African ones. Surge testing has been ordered in Bristol and Liverpool as mutation that makes coronavirus more resistant to the immune system spreads. And it says the clusters have been found in both cities, that is Bristol and Liverpool, of homegrown cases involving the E484K mutation, which is thought to damp the effectiveness of vaccines. Health chiefs fear that the change has an evolutionary advantage. This is the same mutation as is found in the South African variant that prompted a scramble to test tens of thousands of people in 8 areas on Monday. However, the latest cases are thought to have resulted from mutation in Britain. So what they're doing, even in that piece and in the same edition of the Times, they're publishing completely factually conflicting items. Conflicting in the sense that conflicting factually between the headlines and the actual copy underneath. And this is the pattern. Every item about the virus in every part and paper of the Fleet Street and elsewhere, in fact, is riddled with conflicting, contradictory facts. So this is not doing justice to the readers. And by extension, it's not doing justice to the public. And by factual extension, of course, it's not doing justice to the people that are supposed to be exposed to various ways of being infected and exposed to infection. So although they have got hundreds of pages, well, altogether, there are several thousand pages of newsprint covering the so-called news about the vaccine, about the virus, and about the infection, and about the immune system and the vulnerability of the immune system. Now, this is another piece, hilarious and completely stupid. It says 64% of ultra-Orthodox Jews are infected. To what extent is this infection related to religious orientation or religious groups? They have not explained, but let's see what if they explain in this one. It's written by the religious affairs correspondent of the Times, a person called Kaya Barges. Almost 2/3 of London's ultra-Orthodox Jewish community caught the coronavirus last year. A study has found, amid concerns about the difficulty of reaching them with public health advice. The rate was up to 9 times higher than the national average and one of the highest anywhere in the world. Experts have said that the rate could be because of the prevalence of larger households in which several generations live together and higher levels of deprivation. Local authorities have also said that they face challenges in sharing public health advice with those in the strictly Orthodox community who tend not to use the internet or watch television or read secular media. Researchers at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine worked with community groups and rabbis in their study, which took blood samples from 1,242 members of an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community between November and December last year to see if their blood showed evidence of antibodies against COVID-19. So we're reading almost the whole piece to see what is new. They concluded the overall infection rate was found to be 64%, which is one of the highest rates of SARS-CoV-2 infection recorded anywhere in the world. In secondary school children and adults, the rate was 75%. It stood at 28% in children under 5. Men had a higher infection rate than women. Some estimates place the national rate of infection at around 7 to 9%. Last month, police broke up an ultra-Orthodox wedding in North London with about 150 guests. An investigation by Jewish News found that a large number of such weddings had taken place in contravention of lockdown rules during the pandemic. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine said it had no evidence that the high infection rate was down to any flouting of the rules. It suggested factors to do with overcrowded housing and deprivation were more important, and that the community had a high rate of attendance at synagogues, which have been allowed to stay open. Hackney Council said that it faced a challenge in communicating health advice to the ultra Orthodox community because they had no access to television, radio, mainstream media, and little digital access. It said it had been handing out leaflets door to door, placing notices in community newspapers, and sending texts from GP surgeries. Rabbi Harshel Gluck, a strictly Orthodox rabbi, said the community was well aware of the latest advice on the pandemic and added, "It's very painful to see the situation. I think what we need to do is help the living conditions of many people in the neighborhood who, due to the housing crisis, are living in very cramped conditions, which are contributing to the rate of infection." Now, that is absolutely true and factual, that particular quote from that particular ultra Orthodox Jewish rabbi. That is factual. And there is another piece on the Times on page 11 that deserves a little discussion. It's written by a diplomatic correspondent of the Times called Catherine Philp, not Philip, Catherine Philp. And it says that COVID slowly killing democracy. And it says that the coronavirus pandemic triggered a huge rollback of democratic freedoms, giving 2020 the lowest ever score in an annual democracy index compiled for the past 15 years. And it says the 2020 democracy index from the Economist Intelligence Unit found the democracy had deteriorated in all 7 regions of the world for the first time since 2010, driven by government measures to address the emergency. Well, the biggest repressions, read that again. Well, the biggest regressions were in authoritarian regions. The report said the removal of individual liberties in development democracies was the most remarkable feature of 2020. The democracy score for the Middle East fell to its lowest level since the Arab uprisings of July of the early 2010s, as governments reasserted authoritarian instincts after the previous year of widespread protest. The damaging effects of coronavirus on economic prospects and personal freedoms had the effect of limiting open opposition to the authorities. The report said, warning that 2021 could see a new eruption of instability. Now, harsh coronavirus measures pushed France and Portugal from full democracies to flawed democracies. The United States remains a flawed democracy after falling out of the full democracy category in 2016 amid ebbing public trust in institutions, but gained slightly in civil liberties. Now, these are very inaccurate and misleading kind of sentences and assertions. because the democracy is not being actually defined, and democracy is not being particularly, especially defined in the context of the objectively verifiable, objective standards of audit, accountability, transparency, and as measurable by the compliance requirements or the requirements to comply, requirements on each member state, signatory member states, to comply with the rules for human rights, democratic audit, fairness, and basic human rights as detailed in all the articles of the European Convention for Human Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that are still actively signed up to by all the member states in relation to the United Nations. So the United Nations has not been publishing. This is significant because it should be the United Nations should be publishing the index on democracy, and as different from the Economist intelligence unit, which seems to be the source of this piece by the Times' diplomatic correspondent Catherine Philp. What is the United Nations doing? There is no mention of the United Nations or the European Convention of Human Rights in this article at all. And this is a piece in the Times which is absolutely brazenly kind of obvious from the ordinary day-to-day experience, but not covered in such an open admission way by Fleet Street. The Times has a health editor called Kat Lay, Katlay, Kat Lay, is writing here, a health minister has condemned a maternity compensation scheme that gives more to bankers than cleaners. And here's the health minister, he or she, well, it says she, has promised reform. It's a plug for Nadine Dorries. She said yesterday that it was absolutely wrong that the child of a cleaner left disabled due to clinical negligence would receive less than the disabled child of a banker because of how the present system takes earnings into account. She said that the system was outdated and being reviewed. Doris was appearing before the Health and Social Care Select Committee, which is hearing evidence on safety concerns about maternity services in England following incidents at East Kent Hospitals University Trust and Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital NHS Trust. Jeremy Hunt, the committee chairman and former health secretary, asked whether a no-fault compensation system similar to one in Sweden should be considered for England. Doris would not go into detail but said issues of no blame, no fault compensation, the NHS were being looked at in the round. Hunt also said that by one estimate, England was short of about 3,000 midwives. Doris replied that she had asked Health Education England, which works on the recruitment and training, to evaluate how many midwives were needed. So it's again kind of a tokenistic exchange of information, not accountability, and not holding to account these people. A man has described how a lion toyed with his wife before tearing the flesh off his arm after it entered his unguarded tent during an African safari organized by a British travel agency. Patrick Forgood, 64, from Savoie, southern France, who has not regained the use of his arm despite about 15 operations, was speaking after Africa Travel Resource agreed to settle his claim for damages in the High Court in London. In an interview with his local radio station, France Bleu Pays de Savoie, Forgood said he had gone to court to try to force the travel companies to provide better protection for people on safaris. We want to avoid it happening to someone else. Now, this is another story about the unaccountable business capitalism exploitation. And we'll come to the role of the court in this one, as well as talking about the case of the three sons of a mother fighting their sister over an altered will. A will altered more than 25 years after the first will was kind of signed. And the role of a judge who has been described in the Times yesterday as a grumpy judge. She'll be talking about that. And the implication of a grumpy judge's hostile behavior in denying fair hearing in the judicial system to the litigant concerned, claimant concerned, or claimants, the three claimants, the brothers concerned. Now we look at this kind of copy in the Times about the protesters in the tunnel in London who have gone into the tunnel protesting against the high-speed 2. This is the first direct action of this kind that has been taken against this particular monstrosity, the high-speed railway. There have been little local actions across the route from London Euston to Birmingham, but there hasn't been anything like this digging of the tunnel underneath and a number of protesters going in there and have been there since they moved in. Now, the Times is saying that a standoff between HS2 protesters and bailiffs seeking to evict them reached stalemate last night, as activists said they were prepared to stay for weeks in the tunnels beneath the London Park. With the protest entering its seventh day, a High Court judge ordered the climate activists to stop tunneling beneath Euston Square Gardens, but also warned High Speed 2's national eviction team to reassess its strategy. So it's about the HS2 trying to evict these protesters. And we shall be talking more about the details of the kind of tunnel and the implications. But before we do that, whenever we do that, we go back to what the Kudilar campaign has been asserting ever since we became supporters of the campaign against HS2 nearly 10 years ago. HS2 cannot be stopped unless the people whose careers, actually the people making the correct decisions will not be affected by people making the wrong decisions, should be targeted politically and in terms of their careers. The only way the wrongdoers and wrong decision makers backing cross HS2 and the big business, if these people's careers and their incomes are actually exposed and sabotaged and made vulnerable. Because such decision makers as are involved in the HS2 promotion never behave rationally, never behave with compassion, and most certainly never behave with care for the environment. The only language they ever understand and recognize is the language that actually takes away their own benefits and incomes and their security of income and related benefits. They don't look at the environment, they don't look at the science, they don't look at the impact on other people, they don't look at the impact on the environment across the road from London to Birmingham and beyond. They only recognize the language that takes away their powers and their benefits, which is how we stop the Crossrail whole plot promoters and backers, because we threatened the political careers of everyone involved in the East End of London. And we not only threatened, but we actually took action. And we stopped them making progress on their careers, to the point that we forced the departure, the resignations of several wrongdoers in Tower Hamlets Council and their replacements by others who continued the wrongdoing but who too were stopped in their tracks. For example, a former councillor, not a councillor anymore, a former councillor for a ward that includes Brick Lane, or most of the Brick Lane affected by the plot for a hole in the Brick Lane area, Abbasuddin Elias Halal. Our action, which was compelled by his refusal to cooperate with the community, our action meant that he failed to get the nomination for a safe Labour Party seat for Parliament. It was that clear, that it was that obvious. So those people who are protesting against HS2 in the tunnel, they're getting the headings, they're getting the more kind of extensive copy about them in the mainstream Fleet Street. But that's not going to change the decision makers. Because no matter how long these protesters stay in the tunnel, whether they're evicted tomorrow or they're evicted 2 months later, will not affect the careers. remember what we're saying, will not affect the careers of the people involved in the ongoing decision-making process that is giving billions of pounds to the corrupt project. The only way that that process will be stopped is if these people are removed from their offices, their posts. How to remove them is directly dependent on what posts they're holding. Is it posts within the bureaucracy of the department at the expense of transport, DFT or DAFT, or whether they are ministers, generally MPs from various constituencies that are still supporting the high-speed 2 railway disaster scam. If it is those MPs, then the protesters, the campaigners should target those MPs, those seats that are easier to replace or change the incumbents at or in. So, for example, there may be 20 MPs directly involved in the constituencies. Now, they should be targeted. They should be targeted by exactly the same kind of evidence that we produced against our homeless councillors. And we produced and promoted and advocated and published against the likes of Abbasuddin Elias Halal. And those MPs should be kind of exposed as doing damage to the particular constituencies, particular areas. Now, even if they are not replaced, because replacing depends on the holding of the election and all the other things that are longer ranging in terms of time, then despite the fact that it will not be possible to replace them because of the process taking the time due to legislation and all the rest of it, if campaigners begin to focus on the various weaknesses of these parliamentarians and their counterparts in the local councils that are supporting or acting as agents of the HS2 propaganda, their weaknesses should be highlighted right away. If they are highlighted right away, then those highlighting activities would serve as stronger forces against them and against their continuing support for the HS2. That is the lesson. That is one of the biggest lessons that we are making available from the Kudilar campaign to the people who are opposing HS2 along the route. The Kudilar campaign is not physically situated alongside because our main focus was the defense of the East End of London. But in principle, in terms of the strategic kind of lessons and techniques that can be used effectively, we are just sharing what we did in Tower Hamlets. We did many things, but this is one of the things that currently is relevant and that is better, more effective than these people sitting underground in the tunnels. And the other defect with the tunnel protesters is that supposes that the line would be built. Now, if the line is built, these tunnel protesters cannot physically stay in the tunnel. That is physically impossible. So they may endure kind of hardship in the tunnel. And that can be a kind of lesson in terms of determination. But that will not legally or physically or safely make the difference to stop the HS2 high-speed railway line itself. And the other things that the HS2 protesters against the HS2 must do is to publish all the information about the big contractors and all the information about the destruction of the countryside so far, the felling of the trees and the hundreds of thousands of animals having been murdered so far along the road. So we shall be coming back to that in due course, but for the time being, that is the short guidance that we, the Kudilar campaign, have made available online in this television channel program for the benefit of the campaigners to stop the high-speed railway line from London to Birmingham. High-speed 2, that is to say HS2. Now here is a piece about the libel damage that has been granted to Harry over the Mail on Sunday, claiming that Harry had shunned the Marines after he moved to the USA. Now, it is a very, very short kind of allegation that the Mail on Sunday published. So if the amount of damage and harm and untruth contained in the Mail on Sunday is applied to the lies about the Kudilar campaign and the movement defending the community in the East End of London, if the same criteria is used and applied, then the Queen's Bench Division, where the libel actions are heard in London and in the UK, is guilty of racistly preventing the processing of the 3 defamation claims made by our campaign against the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council, London Borough of Newham Council, and the Spitalfield SSBA Community Trust and the SSBA Spitalfield Small Business Association. Now, if the actual damages that have been kind of kept undisclosed, where the statement in court left Harry with a bill for legal costs of more than 30,000. His solicitor Shillings said the cost for the application were just under 35,000, a sum described by the judge as manifestly disproportionate. He said that the Mail on Sunday, which was obliged to pay Harry's reasonable costs, had to pay only £2,500 of that. Harry's lawyers also had to tone down the statement read out in court. The judge said the claimant's original draft statement in open court was unduly tendentious, and it included criticism of the defendant, which have by agreement now been removed or amended. Now, whatever the details of the kind of contents of the openly read statement, by all reasonable comparisons, the claims by the movement defending the community in the East End of London, the Kudilar campaign, and other consolidated claimants, principal claimants, against the London Borough of Newham Council, the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council, and the SSBA Community Trust and the Spitalfield Small Business Association, and individual criminals and libel perpetrators and defendants. The amounts that can justifiably be claimed against them would exceed several £100 million based on the damages they have caused and they have incited. And as we say, in the context of the theft of the contents and the properties based at the kitten's house, as well as in the related properties and accommodations and addresses, that would be equivalent to 10 to 20 billion pounds of costs and prices. And so, how the Queen's Bench Division operates this massive fraud and criminality is never exposed and never kind of audited and the perpetrating administrative staff and the perpetrating judges are never held to account. And for example, the libel case of McAlpine against Barker. McAlpine has died since, but he sued the wife of then Speaker of the House of Commons, John Barker, Sally Barker. Now, although they are married, it was a tweet by Sally Barker, nothing to do with John Barker. And despite the fact that Sally Barker is married to John Barker, Sally Barker is a person of her independent identity and activities and thoughts. People who don't like Barker often make the mistake of confusing her with John Barker and kind of attacking her as part of their attack plot against Barker. We don't have any contact with them or any agency for them. In fact, on the record, we have denounced John Barker as a racist of long standing. So therefore, there is no reason for anyone to suppose that our comment about the wrong award given against Sally Barker is anything to do with any contact or relationship or agency with either of them. Objectively speaking, the behavior of the Queen's Bench Division is corrupt in itself in big ways. And this Harry wins damages is only because it's Harry. A similar claim against the Mail and Sunday would not be treated in the same way by the Queen's Bench Division, and we shall be updating on that and other aspects of the criminality that is the Queen's Bench Division. When we say criminality, we don't just say the criminality of the kind of judicial aspect of the court, but the administrative, bureaucratic bigger part, because the administration staff in the courts, both in the Queen's Bench Division and the other divisions of the High Court, do the bulk of the decision making. And the decision making is actually the majority of the decisions that are formalized by the judges. And we shall be elaborating on those details in due course in updated form, because we have been talking about this for months. Now, here is a piece in the Times yesterday, Times of Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2021, on page 17 of the Times. And the headline is Sons, it's a plural, Sons, S-O-N-S. Sons appeal after grumpy judge costs them £850,000. Now, in the copy that written by Jonathan Amis, who is the current legal editor after Francis Gibbs left the post after more than 20 years. And it says that the first paragraph actually starts with a truthful statement. Going to court over a parent's will is rarely a smooth ride. But one family claims that their experience was made worse by an excessively grumpy judge. Now that is all the substance related to the headline. Sons appeal after a grumpy judge cost them £850,000. Just £150,000 short of £1 million. Now, the rest of it is boring detail, which is not reporting on what the grumpy judge actually did for him to be called grumpy. But we can confirm that in a series of communications contacts with the various courts in England over decades, our campaign, our movement can assert, not just confirm, but assert that the court system, strictly based on facts and the evidence, is corrupt, is racist, and is hostile most of the times to ordinary people. And that the behavior of the courts, strictly factual behavior of the courts, shows that the licensed law traders and the members of the judiciary and the not necessarily legally licensed members of the staff in the courts together constitute the corruption under the banner of laws in the UK. And we hasten to add that nothing that this guy, this barrister turned novelist, the writer of the fiction that was televised, nothing he wrote came anywhere near to telling the truth about the corruption of the court system. And we have said before, nothing Charles Dickens wrote comes anywhere near to telling the truth about the behavior of the licensed law traders, either in the time that Dickens wrote or since. And we don't believe that there exists any work of fiction or any documentary work, either in printed form or in video or in radio, in audio or video, that comes anywhere near to telling the facts about the extent of corruption, the extent of illegality that the courts constitute and represent. So what and the online independent newspaper, which is not available in printed form anymore, has got it's saying, warning, UK could turn into virus melting pot. Testing steps up as mutations of infectious British variant found. And what it is saying, it's a version of the facts that we have read from the Times. Controls were yesterday stepped up in parts of the UK hit by new COVID variants. As scientists warned, Britain risked becoming a melting pot for mutations believed to strengthen the virus's resistance to vaccine. Now, this is it. The vaccine propaganda, we have said scientifically, haven't said it because we have an agenda to demonize the vaccine promoters or the vaccine propaganda. What we have said is that the vaccine was being promoted without proper clinical test and evidence of proper test having been properly carried out before the virus was, the vaccine was marketed as the all-solving panacea against the virus. That is what he said. And that is what the Independent is saying in this online front page of the Independent. And in a cartoon about Boris Johnson, they are showing a cartoon about Boris Johnson getting tested at his door. And the tester is door-to-door COVID response test. And the test is showing that Boris Johnson appears to have both of his ears kind of being injected or pierced. Whatever they're saying is not kind of clear, but they're saying something about Johnson's. Where is that? Yes. That's the cartoon on the Independent. And they're not spelling out what they're saying. And there is a headline in the editorial of the Independent which says, "No one is safe from the virus until everyone is safe." Deputy heads will roll, as the old saying goes, but the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has the dubious distinction of making it fresh. Besieged by critics of her vaccine program, she has blamed Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis for the fiasco. She may be right, of course, and the hapless Latvian may indeed be responsible for the recent public health and diplomatic disasters. But it seems ignoble for von der Leyen to dump on him in this way. Collective responsibility surely applies to the European Union commissioners, and there is absolutely no need beyond saving her skin why von der Leyen should further politicize the vaccine challenge. It is far too important to be embroiled in office politics, and the European Union's disputes with AstraZeneca should be treated for what they are, a prosaic, if crucial, matter of commercial law. The recent intervention by France's Emmanuel Macron also need to be doused down. Claiming the AstraZeneca vaccine is quasi ineffective for older patients makes no sense in its own terms, and insofar as any meaning can be attached to it is plain wrong. This is no way to run a vaccine rollout. Now, the Independent, of course, is part of the propaganda kind of service to the cabal fronted by Boris Johnson, because Johnson has put in the House of Peers the man who owns the Independent. So the Independent is not going to criticize, let alone truthfully kind of report on the disaster, the real disaster that is the Boris Johnson cabal. And the grumpy judge cost them £850,000. We shall talk more about the various acts of sabotage that the various staff in the Queen's Bench Division in the High Court have perpetrated over the last few years against the claimants, against the London Borough of Newham Council, against the London Borough of Travellers Council, against the SSBA Community Trust, and against the SSBA itself, over the theft and the loss and the damage to the unique intellectual properties and original creations and works covering all disciplines of thought that took place and is continuing to be perpetrated because of the theft and criminality perpetrated first in August 2012. Now, here is a piece in today's Times on page 19. Well, there are 3 items on this page that we shall be examining. The first one is about the 13-year-old schoolboy who acted as the cell leader for online network for violent neo-Nazis. And the 13-year-old neo-Nazi schoolboy would be sentenced next Monday, said Judge Mark Dennis, QC. At the Old Bailey yesterday. I should be talking about the role of the schools and the role of the parents and the role of society and the role of the local councils about safeguarding children. And we shall be contextually updating on the commentary on the Shamima Begum and the 2 other girls that left for Syria in 2015, actually February 2015. Well, they were reported to have crossed into Syria through Turkey. After they had done that, and it was published first time as having been done in February 2015. This is February 2021. So 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 is the sixth calendar year. And we shall be talking more about Shamima Begum and what the local councils and others failed to do to protect them. Now, here is a piece about Swampi, the HS2 protester. He has got a son with him because Swampi's teenager son is a chief of the old blockade. What it says here, as Charlie Parker is writing this, the mother of a teenage high speed 2 protester is worried for his safety after he joined his father, the veteran activist Swampi, in tunnels near Euston Station. Swampi, whose real name is Daniel Hooper, 47, said that his son Rory, 16, helped to build the tunnel in North London in secret. He then asked to join activists before eviction teams arrived. The protesters have spent 6 days in 2 tunnels, which took 2 months to dig, in an attempt to delay development of the high-speed railway. Now, that is it. That is what we said. Even delaying is not safe. It's not a stopping it. And what we are saying is that HS2, the project, can be stopped, but not by the tunnel protest. And we shall speak more about that in due course. Now, let's move a bit further and look at the other Fleet Street. Now, the Daily Star is kind of running a front page dedicated to saluting Captain Tom. And they are doing a kind of different front page than the other tabloids, because the others are doing almost identical kind of thing. But this is the one that the Daily Star is running, which includes the picture of the now deceased captain when he was a young soldier. And they've got the Star have got 2 pages on inside about Captain Tom, and all the other Fleet Street papers are doing the same. They've got more pages. For example, the Murdoch's come has got 8 pages on him. And the Financial Times is running the main front page, asking the European Union to stop rising trade tensions in Northern Ireland. Now, what does it say about the taking back control? And there is a kind of new piece on the Financial Times under the banner of science, where an American agency is hoping to predict disease just like the weather. And the Financial Times has its second editorial today is about cleaning up environmental reporting journalism, the need to clean up the standard of environmental journalism. Well, that is the beginning, but that's not the solution, because the solution is to clean up all journalism, all reporting, and stop the role of the papers and other journalistic outlets being used as stooges of the wrongdoing propagandists.